Now I would like to invite for a few minutes, cognizant of the time, for our esteemed tribunal members to see if there are any questions that you might have, and I'll pass you the microphone of our experts. I'm sorry?
Question for Marco. The calculation you did of the cost, if Chevron was paying for its annual production of oil, you said it was approximately $300 million per year. And do you have did you think of, or did you have a suggestion about how that could be addressed? That's not just Chevron, that's the oil industry in general. Did you have any thoughts about how to use that?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, it is up to the community and society to decide. But one proposal I made, if we were to charge $100 per ton of CO2 emission, we could divide that in two and use half of it, which would be about let's say $80 trillion. It's about $300 billion a year. To restore ecosystems around the world, and the rest could be used to eliminate extreme poverty around the world. Because it's just $365 billion a year would eliminate the 1 billion people living under $1 a day, which is extreme poverty. So when nations are saying we have the goal in 30 years to eliminate poverty, it can be done in a single year with a tax on carbon, half of it to restore ecosystems and do the carbon capture in the right way to reduce CO2, and the other half would be eliminating extreme poverty in the world.
Thank you.
I was very interested in the in some of the suggestions about restorative justice and ideas about pathways forward. And I'm wondering to what extent, and this was basically across the board here, I'm wondering to what extent the people who testified were looking at the local conditions that were affecting the people who were impacted, but also were looking at the local conditions at the source of extraction, and also the conditions that came up in the transport. What is the sense of the kind of global nature of the solutions that are proposed?
Thank you. Would one of our experts like to talk with the more global impacts of extraction and transport of oil from the Chevron refinery?
I think in Richmond, we're very cognizant that Chevron, what they do in Richmond is just one point in a long stream of their economy. We've had connections with the people of Ecuador. Our mayor, Gail McLaughlin, went down to visit on the invitation of the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa. We're also cognizant of the damage that's been done in Nigeria to the Igbo people and other folks in the Niger Delta. But at the same time, we're a community that is facing a tremendous onslaught from Chevron itself, just in our everyday life. So we try to be cognizant and recognize the damage that's being done to those people, and also learn lessons from that. So we know that when Chevron is manipulating governments in other countries, we see how Chevron is also manipulating our government. We have an election coming up in November, and their campaign accounts started out with $1.6 million on behalf of their candidates against our candidates. They have polluted our democracy in a way that has bought billboards all around the city. People's mailboxes are getting flooded with hit pieces with wild accusations against the progressive candidates. And yet what we do is kind of what we're doing here today. We're getting together and organizing people, going door to door, and there's people out there as we speak in Richmond knocking on doors, getting the word out about the truth about our candidates and the truth about their candidates, because we cannot compete with their money, but we can compete with our people power. And so that's the one thing we're trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from the judges?
It was referred a little bit by Andres. I wanted to kind of, throughout in what we have heard is really about the ability of corporations, in this case Chevron, to make illegal the land, the communities. So the whole illegality, that was fascinating. And you have to sit here and question laws by who and for whom. Within that context, you mentioned some figures around Richmond. I think, and listening to the alternatives, or I don't want to, just things that are happening on the ground, I'm sitting here with the notion that actually we do know how to feed the world. We do know how to house everyone. We do know how to live in ways where we live with nature that we are part of rather than against nature. The question is, how do we figure out to remove those from power who prevent that from happening? And within that context, do we know how much money is being put in Richmond, this money in politics? How much money is being put which makes the United States government unable to move and do something as we all around the world face climate crisis? What is the money that is being put in by the fossil fuel industry to violate all our rights, our every breath that we take, the rights of the future generations, the right of my daughter who is sitting right here to be able to live in a healthy world?
Thank you. Would someone like to follow? And you'd like to? Would someone like to follow up on that? Yes, Stephanie.
I wanted to kind of combine the two last questions. One is because of the system, it targets indigenous because indigenous people operate off of a system that is more sustainable and simplistic. Within the capitalist economy, everything is about growth. And so the weak link from a relationship perspective is to target indigenous. So one of the things is for the indigenous people around the world to unite together and prevent this extraction globally. But at the same time, when you're looking at the legalities of Chevron and putting people out of power, it means to first get the powers that be to acknowledge that they don't give us rights and that we declare and take authority over our lives and all over our planets, as well as creating the new laws on a broad policy scale that compete with Chevron. When Chevron is dealing with the state senators and representatives and assembly people and the politicians, you know, they give them presentations, they come to their offices, they give them parties, they feed them all of the information. We ought to be feeding information on the policy side. And as I'm talking about bridging the gaps between indigenous people and those that are our allies, the indigenous people doing what we need to do to change the world, but having allies that have privilege to change the system, joining together from that aspect and getting our allies to use that privilege to actually change the system so we can work together, and this can be a very powerful movement.
Thank you. Thank you. And Brian?
Thank you, witnesses. My question is for our Indigenous witness, Karina. I noticed that you still address our people and society with your native tongue, and that your people originated as the Ohlone people in Richmond. I did hear that from one of our other witnesses that there is language, limited language warnings of the fishing piers due to the toxicity that is in the fish and the shellfish. And you did make mention that shellfish is one of the items that your people use for spiritual and your traditions and your heritage rites, which I believe indigenous people combine spirituality to handle all of our day-to-day issues or challenges that come up to us in life. We teach our children different ways of how to use spiritual items to help them. So that being said, with shellfish being toxic, how does your people, what do you do when it comes to acknowledging your spiritualness, your traditions, your ceremonies, if there's toxicity in the shellfish?
Thank you, Courtney, for that question. I think that one of the things that we do as Indigenous people, especially growing up in an urban setting, that we have to adopt different ways, or we have to adapt. And Indigenous people from all over the world are adapting to all of these different kinds of things that have happened. Unfortunately, when we have to do a reburial, some of the shells that we get are not indigenous from the bay anymore, that we have to use shellfish from other places. One of the things that we would like to do is to work with our allies in cleaning up the bay and cleaning up the areas that are in the Bay Area for us to continue on our traditional ways. I think that one of the things that's really important for me, being a grandmother, is to realize that when we pass on this information to the next generations, that this generation is really about making those changes. That we right now are in that place where we can say, wow, humanity really screwed up and now we can fix this. That we have to pass on to the next generations the knowledge that we don't have to continue to harm our Mother Earth, that we don't have to keep extracting the blood out of her. I think that also one of the things that Carl talked about and asking that question about how do Indigenous people, how do we tie those into those other places that are being impacted by Chevron, extracting oils from other places. As Indigenous people all over the world, we are the hardest hit and most impoverished in most places, and we don't have the power and the voice in those places to say things, and people are in such vast poverty. But I look at our brothers and sisters in the Amazon who are taking up bows and arrows against guns, against bulldozers in their traditional territory, who are saying, I don't care if we all have to die, we are not going to stop fighting for our place in this earth. And I think that that's something that we need to do as human beings, that it's time to stop listening to the governments, it's time to stop listening to Chevron corporations and all of these corporations, that we outnumber those people in government, that we are the ones that need to have a say, that all of our futures are at stake right now. And my grandchildren, I think that that's really what pushes me now, is that because I have grandchildren now, that those are those things that I want my grandchildren to know what it is to fish in the bay and not to just eat a half a fish a month. That we open up those creeks. How many people know that there are so many creeks that are under the streets here in Oakland, that we don't have trout and salmon running up anymore? How wonderful it would be for us to be able to have a sustainable economy so that all of us that live in these particular cities can feed ourselves right there. And how wonderful would that be? And I think that Indigenous people make up a large population all over the world, and that we're calling for ourselves, we're calling on this generation to create a revolution.
Thank you. Thank you.